Hi there, welcome to Let's Talk Tottenham. No game this week, which is quite a good thing because Spurs stress people out most of the time anyway. But a very exciting stream for me today. Not talking about a game, but I'm joined by Kat Lucas, who has written a book about Tottenham. And here it is. Tottenham From the Lane, a story of Spurs in N17. Thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And writing a book, I mean, that must have been quite exciting to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Spurs is kind of for my sins. It's like it's a lifelong passion. So, it's kind of a labour of love. But yeah, it's fascinating, kind of delving into all the sort of early days, and then obviously it goes. It starts in 1882, and then right up until this year. So, yeah, it's amazing, kind of going through all these things that no one alive was even aware of, and then all the way up to today.
Yeah, excellent. So we'll be talking about everything that we can think of about the book, what inspired Kat to write it, favourite part of the book, the humble beginnings that we started with to where the multinational company that we are now, and everything in between. If you want to buy this book, you can buy that here. So pitchpublishing.co.uk/shop/Tottenham-Lane. You'll find that to be able to buy there. So I highly encourage you to do that. Before we start, I do have to say, as many of you know, Bob Spur is very seriously ill with COVID at the moment, still in quite a bad way. So thinking of you, Bob, praying for you, Bob, and hope you get better soon. You're a strong guy. I'm sure you'll bounce back. It's just a hurdle that you have to get over. And then you'll be back on streams, your own stream, this stream, and many other streams. Yeah. So, yeah, hopefully you're okay. Yeah, big love to you, Bob. Any comments you have, obviously hit the like, hit the subscribe. Any comments you have, put them in. Any questions you've got for Kat about the book or anything Spurs, fire them in. We've got one question from Cody. How much Tylenol did you need to write this book? I'm not sure what that means. I'm not with the.
No, I'm not entirely. I don't know what that is. I'd have thought it's some kind of.
I'm assuming it's drugs because you're obviously using a large chunk of your time to write about a team that frustrate us so much. But
I don't know if that's kind of the book side of things, or just having to think about Spurs 24/7 a year is not something I'd recommend to anyone. But
I mean, how long did it take you to write from the initial I'm going to write a Spurs book to obviously you had a lot of research to do to here's the finished book? I mean, it must have taken.
Yeah, I mean, all in all, I'd say a couple of years. But I suppose it's hard to say because there was kind of a lot of it was sort of being in the archives and speaking to people. So it's not per se putting the book together. But then I think since from having the idea to it came out in October. So yeah, about 2 years all in all.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously got to have the results. I mean, when we had a bad result or an awful performance, were you tempted to go, I can't be dealing with this, or was it always, this is my project, I'm doing it?
Yeah, I suppose the good side of it is, because it kind of goes back to the 60s and stuff like that. So if you've, some of the darker moments of the last couple of years, you can look back and think, oh, no, this is fine. This is going to, we're going to persevere with this. So it's a nice, if it's an escape, if anything.
Yeah, that's essentially what this is. This all started because my family and friends got fed up with me moaning about Tottenham, so I thought I'll record it. No one can tell me to shut up; they just don't watch. Cody's got back. Tylenol is a medicine for headaches, apparently.
Oh, I see.
So kind of got there.
Oh, in that case, yeah, then a lot, yeah. But yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah, but what inspired you to write the book in the first place? Was it just like you say, a distraction, or was it something you always wanted to do, or what was the?
I suppose a bit of both. Yeah, something I've always wanted to do. Obviously, I'm a lifelong Spurs fan. I'm a journalist as well, so I cover Spurs. And I suppose just in terms of the content itself, the new stadium is just such a focus kind of for the local community. And with the end of White Hart Lane, I remember being there sort of on the final day against Man United and thinking, this is the end. So a lot of this is going to be lost, and especially if you look back at kind of the 60s and 70s that are covered in the book, there's a lot of it that a lot of people today don't know about. And so it was quite nice sort of speaking to people who wanted to sort of share their tales of these kind of eras that are, we don't want them to be lost because they're such a kind of an important part of the club's history.
And do you think the history and the is kind of being lost now? Obviously, you can argue that with football in general now. Football is just, it's almost become more about the money than it is the actual football, where obviously this was, Spurs were started by 3 school kids in Tottenham Marshes. Obviously a local, very, very local kind of thing there rather than a company. And now football is obviously this multinational billion-dollar company. So do you think we're losing the kind of club, or do you think that's just football in general, or do you think the essence of the club is still there?
Yeah, I think it applies to any club. I bet Arsenal fans, United fans, anyone would say the same. I think we all kind of have that same, particularly if the sort of big six, if you like. There is that slight disconnect from the club's past, and I think that's particularly the case when you have a new stadium. And that's not to say anything, that they ought not to have built the new stadium, but it's inevitable that you lose that sense of occasion, because we've had maybe 2-3 memorable games at the new ground, really. Maybe a couple of Champions League nights like City and the first leg against Ajax, and I suppose City this year again under Nuno, but there's not an awful lot yet, and that's not the club's fault, but you don't walk in like you would at White Hart Lane, where you can feel the history. Yeah. You've lost that sense of it. So I think the club do make an effort to sort of link back to those elements, but it's difficult. So I suppose that's what I was kind of interested in.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly in the comments, Wayne Bonner, how you doing, Wayne? Always on Spurs streams. But yeah, to your point now, I did the stadium tour of White Hart Lane, and then a month or 2 ago did the new stadium, and it's not a football stadium, this one. White Hart Lane was a football stadium. But yeah, in terms of the book, it's more about the community and the actual club rather than the players and managers and everything like that. So how would you describe the book to people who don't know about it and who are watching, listening? How would you describe the book to kind of summarize what it's about?
I suppose it's, like you say, it's a blend. So it's half football, but half looking at the community and the local history. So as much as it's not kind of, this game happened then, Spurs won. Obviously, there's a bit of that, but a lot of it is looking at, say, for example, how the club was founded, looking at the local people, the businesses that supported them, how that might not have happened without the local people. Again, sort of later on, looking at 2011 and what happened in the summer and how that actually convinced the club to stay in North London when they might otherwise not. So there's kind of it's not, obviously there's so many books about Spurs, there's some really good ones like, Julie Welch's one, and there's a lot of histories out there of Spurs, but I suppose, this is more of a local feel to the club, I suppose.
Yeah, and how much research went into all of that? I mean, in terms of, none of us were alive in 1882, but you even write about the actual area of Tottenham in the 1400s and even before that. So how was the research done? Was that speaking to historians and historians of the club, or was that your own research on Google and
it's a bit of both. There's in Tottenham there's quite a few archives. So there's one just actually a couple. When you go to Lordship Lane and you go off just before White Hart Lane, so there's an archive up there, which is nothing to do with the club, but it's quite good for that you've got all these sort of early maps of what Tottenham used to be like, and there's a couple of books as well on Tottenham, because it used to be quite a significant place. Long before there was now it's known for its football club, but years and years ago, it was quite a sort of a market town almost. It was kind of barely part of London. It was connected, but it wasn't really seen as a major part of London at all. So there's all that, and then there's the council as well. I worked with them a little bit on it. So, and then elements of the club as well, and then speaking to local people. So hopefully it's got a bit of everything from the community.
Yeah, because what did local people kind of think when you spoke to them? Because you mentioned in the book that that they kind of view the new stadium as a spaceship, and it's kind of an alien kind of thing, and in an area of there's quite a lot of poverty there, and it's not the nicest area in the world, and it towers over most of the buildings, and you've got all of these kind of low costing buildings, if you like, and then you've got this massive thing. So what did the people think? The local people think about that when you spoke to them?
I suppose it's a mix, isn't it? Because like you say, a lot of people in Tottenham aren't Spurs fans now. Most people who go to the games are not the same people that live there, which I suppose is quite unusual for a lot of clubs. But it's a mix, because in a way it's a massively important part of Tottenham. But then equally you have got this kind of conflict where you've, like I think it talks about it a bit in the first few chapters, how I think there's a charity called Trust for London that looks into the numbers behind it, and there's higher homelessness than other parts of London, higher child poverty, all this kind of thing going on. And then in the middle you've got this £1 billion football club in this massive stadium, and you think, what, so kind of it's an odd mix, I suppose. So there's an element of that, and maybe that's sort of fuels the disconnect a little bit between the local people. And I know that the club do certain things, like they give away tickets. I think there's I don't know the percent, but in the new stadium there's always something like 1% maybe of tickets are given to kind of nearby people and things like that. So it's just little things to sort of help ease that divide. But I think it is still there, definitely.
I think they've got to do stuff. You can't have an area like that and then you have £1 billion stadium and then literally not do anything. And I'm sure I read when they were kind of building the stadium that part of the infrastructure and improving the infrastructure was part of the deal with that. I mean, do you know if that is the case, and if there are things planned, and again, and how important is it that the infrastructure is helped and everything like that along with this stadium? It's
a difficult one, I think, because on the one hand, it's Spurs have the ability to do that. They've done. I don't know if you've been into the White Hart Lane station. Looks completely new now. They've done a lot of the funding for that. So there's that, and I think there's a few other things like the old ticket office is now a pub again. That's a Beaver Town. So there's a few sort of tweaks. I suppose it comes down to whether any company can kind of have that much influence over a borough, because on the one hand you don't want to completely gentrify it and take away all its existing character, but then the council were quite keen for Spurs to do that. So, and again there's this divide, because you get some within the club who say it's a company, we're not obliged to do this at all, and then you've got the other side which is very keen to sort of engage and develop where they can.
I'm sure I read that they were developing it, and I haven't gone to that stadium. I go Seven Sisters and then go to the Beehive, which I was delighted to read that you wrote about. I love the Beehive. It's become my. I have all these superstitions when I go, just because I do something, we then win, so I have to do them. So I'm on about 15, but one of them is I have to have a pint in the Beehive before each game.
Yeah, me too. I've never seen. I'll look out for you next time. Yeah, the Beehive's my my go-to as well.
Yeah.
So.
We can't see anyone in there because on match days it's literally packed and you can't move, and there's an outside as well. But I swear they water down the pints in there, because I can finish a pint in there in 5 minutes. I've never been able to do that in my life. Got a couple of comments here from Cody. Julie Welch's book is brilliant, as I'm sure Kat's is. You can compare them, Cody. I haven't read Julie's, so you can go buy Kat's and then you can compare the two. He's also said there's a bit of a Hunger Games vibe when you look at the stadium and its surroundings. I remember White Hart Lane coming out of Seven Sisters. You had to walk 10-15 minutes to be able to see any of the stadium. Now you walk out of Seven Sisters, turn around, and it's right there. And Craig Bowler, a few comments here. How you doing, Craig? Always on here in the comments. The land around the ground is up for development. I think the plans will make it look like Wembley, with a walkway from the station and the flats. And the land has recently been sold by the club to an ENIC-owned property development company, so I imagine they'll put in planning permission soon. I don't know if you know anything of those, or if that's kind of after when the book ended.
I don't know if it's COVID, but I think it's been slightly delayed because I think it was maybe meant to have happened by now. So you'd have White Hart Lane station here, and then the stadium, and there would be a walkway as you say, in between. And I think it's sort of meant to make it more accessible as well. It's meant to be like the most kind of accessible stadium in the world, but hasn't happened yet. And I think it might be. I think COVID's kind of messed up a lot of things.
Yeah.
Stadium that they were planning to do a bit sooner.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon either. Yeah, thanks for all your comments. Keep them coming in. Any questions that you've got, we're here talking to Kat Lucas about her new book, Tottenham From the Lane, a story of Spurs in N17, which you can buy from here at pitchpublishing.co.uk/shop/Tottenham-Lane. But obviously, 2 years to write a book. What was your favourite part to write in terms of research, or in terms of just writing it, or the information that you got and everything like that, or do you not have a favourite part and it was all superb because it took your mind off the fact that we were losing games?
I suppose I'd have to say there's a big bit on the double in the middle, so I guess it's an obvious one, but I mean partly because I spoke to a few family members of the players, and that was fascinating because it was something I'd never heard about before, and even speaking to people who were there on the on the open top buses who through Tottenham and things like that, and it was just sort of a part that I was so aware of, but I couldn't almost envisage what it would have been like to be there on the day.
Yeah.
Both when they won the league and then when they had that afterwards, when the cup final in '61 as well. And so speaking to people, Spurs fans who have been going for sort of 60, 70, it was fascinating. So I suppose that'd have to be the one.
Yeah, and question from Cody: what was your favourite era to research? Would it have been that one just because of the success there, or was there another era that was your favourite?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose either that or the early kind of from 1882, again, because there's so many papers and archives and things that you can look back on, and you just find so many little snippets that are not kind of particularly well known. So yes, I suppose the early days as well.
Yeah, I mean, were you surprised by some of the stuff you found out? I certainly the part of they were seen as the guys who started the team seen as kind of middle class and lower class mobs. As I think you wrote, chuck tomatoes at them. I'm sure there's a lot of fans who would love to chuck tomatoes at some of our players at the moment. But
they don't sell tomatoes, do they? In the goal line.
But being that it's a community club.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose.
Were you surprised that they were kind of not dismissed by some of the community, but it wasn't like the community spirit that you'd kind of expect from some quarters?
Yeah, I suppose when I started on those bits, I thought of it as I think you always have in your mind what you think you'll find, and I think I envisaged it as the local people would all loved this new football team. They were up and coming so quickly, Spurs as well. And they're young kids, and I suppose that element of it, I didn't see that coming at all. That there was this kind of tension with some locals, and even things like how difficult it was for them to find somewhere to play football because it's being built up all the time, and then like you say, you've got these other schoolboys who see them as the players as quite well to do and slightly more middle class, and so there was all these kind of local elements that I suppose that's what you get as well, because I think it says it early on that most clubs of that time were sort of working men's clubs, and it was unusual to have a club founded by kids essentially. So it all kind of adds up to what makes Spurs so unique. Yeah,
and I mean, I read a little bit of it, and there was so much I didn't know about. But one guy who's Cody's mentioned, John Vipsher. What are your thoughts on John Vipsher? And he's was he the first manager, kind of manager?
So he gave the club a lot of support in the early days. So he was kind of a local man. He worked with, I think it was the Bible classes, which is how he knew a lot of the kids. He also knew, because it's quite a small world in those days, so he knew a lot of the families anyway. So yeah, he's a kind of a fascinating individual, but a lot of these, like even Bobby Buckle as well, one of the players who founded the club, they have a massive part to play in the early days, and then they kind of disappear. And you think that wouldn't happen these days, but a lot of them sort of move away. And I think John Ripton was the same. He moved to Kent or somewhere kind of a little bit out the way, and that was it. That was it. So he sort of had a massive part to play in founding Spurs, and then no connection to the club after a few years. But he obviously as well had a big part to play in the decision of when they're amateurs, whether to go professional or not, which wasn't an easy decision to make at all. I mean, now I suppose it would be, but at the time it was quite, football as well. If anything, back then, this is kind of Victorian time, so people saw football as a game, and it's a leisure pursuit, and it's a bit odd to be earning money for something like that. So I think you get this in the arts and in other things as well, but particularly in football, it was almost looked down on a little bit, the idea that you would be getting paid to play a game. It seems a bit ridiculous, but there was a lot of conflict in the early days with Spurs and that side of things.
Yeah, Tottenham was it more of a rugby town, or there was certainly a Hotspur rugby club? I could be getting confused.
There was the cricket club.
Sorry.
Cricket. But football generally wasn't really a thing, in the South. So it was quite unusual that the boys picked, football. They were cricket players. They wanted another sport to play, and I think it was either rugby or football, and they went towards football. But there was no kind of guarantee that would have happened at all, because there weren't many football teams in the South at that time.
No, so why did they decide on football rather than rugby? Which I think just because there wasn't anything in the South, so let's bring it to the South, or
possibly. I think it's kind of lost in the mists of time. I don't know if anyone knows. Yeah, why?
Yeah, but why did they move away? If, obviously, Bobby Buckle, who kind of founded the club, like you say, that would never happen. Kind of now, founders now would still be involved somehow. Cody said with John Vipsher, he moved to Dover, he believes. But again, why was it that he left, or was it just the time had run out and wanted to do something different?
Yeah, so this was kind of post, playing and all that sort of thing. So they, their personal lives took them away from London, and that was just the way it was. Obviously, there was, there was no kind of communication back then. So, yeah, Bobby Buckle in particular, I think he came back for sort of one kind of signatory thing, or it might have been the cup final, actually, the 21, I want to say. Don't quote me on that, but he came back as kind of a guest of honor. But other than that, yeah, quite not a lot of connection.
Yeah, it's quite sad, really, when you think about it, that you've founded something which now is multi money and millions and everything, and he essentially kind of walked away from it. But yeah, another question from Cody. Cheers for all the questions, Cody. How did you become a Spurs supporter, and what made you make the poor decision to stress yourselves out on a weekendly basis?
Yeah, I often ask myself the same question.
You're not alone.
No, I suppose like a lot of people, it's it's a family thing. So yeah, my whole family are Spurs fans, and going back years and years, and my dad and dad's dad, and going back, and that my family actually used to live sort of opposite White Hart Lane and just off the Park Lane. So yeah, really kind of local thing for us. So yeah, it kind of didn't have much of a choice. I suppose Man United, but because David Beckham, I was kind of that age, with Beckham and like class of '92. So I suppose they would have been the only alternative. But here we are.
Yeah, but you wouldn't change it for the world, would you? You wouldn't have had a book otherwise.
No, I suppose this could be called, Man United from. So.
Yeah. My support it's my dad's and Gary Lineker's fault. I blame them entirely. But yeah, I mean, so with your family, so like your dad and grandparents, were they some of the people you used to get research on, certainly in the 60, 61 time? Or
Yeah,
was that just a kind of, what was your experience of that time? And then you go and get, accounts from quite a few different people over the same thing.
yeah. Do you know? I suppose I don't think I spoke to any of my family specifically for the book, but I think maybe that's where that comes from. Wanting to know more about that, because I suppose I've been brought up being told about 1961, and I think my dad's first game would have been 62 when Spurs, the first game of the new season, and he was saying he remembers going and Spurs were the champions and all that. So I suppose that's kind of in the back of my mind. I've always wanted to know more about that time. And then, there's so many people obviously who were there who, love talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, your book obviously talks about the new stadium. We've got another question, Cody, and I'll warn you, this is a polarising one. Everyone's got an opinion of this. What do you think of the current owners? And you get on these streams here, you get some real pro Levy-ins, you get some real pro Levy-outs, you get some, and then everywhere in between. But what's your personal view on the owners?
I'm going to be a bit of a fence sitter, unfortunately. So hopefully I won't offend anyone that way. No, I understand fully the unhappiness with the owners, and Daniel Levy, I suppose, is kind of the face of ENIC, so I think he gets a lot of the sort of the sort of hostility when it's the whole thing, isn't it? ENIC as a Joe Lewis, and it doesn't have to
be an in or out question, Cody says.
Well,
that's typical of how it is now, isn't it? Like a lot of Spurs fans, you're either Levy in or you're Levy out.
Yeah, I mean,
the kind of
there's
perception.
Always the question as well of what's the alternative. And I suppose even aside from the stadium and Hotspur Way and everything Daniel Levy's done kind of for the stability of the club. I mean, who else would it be? I think the difficulty is with Spurs, because since ENIC came in, when they bought them, they never would. The way it's been built up to sort of £1 billion institution, that kind of narrows down quite significantly the number of people that would be able to buy Spurs. And would you have a new owner that would be able to fund the team more effectively? I think, like most people, you look back at that time when, the end of the sort of Pochettino era, and that if there were chances to build on that team, that sort of nearly title winning team. And I think that was the turning point for a lot of people with Daniel Levy, when people think, what, if only. But it's difficult because, do you want owners like Newcastle? I know it's not the only alternative, but that's not something I would want either. So
no, I think you can have owners like that, and you'll obviously win trophies. Do they mean anything when you look at City now? Apart from that Champions League that they won, the leagues don't really seem to mean that much to fans. They get 40,000 in a 60,000 seat stadium every week. For me, the turning point with Levy was obviously I'm annoyed with the Pochettino stuff. He earned the right to get his players. And you mentioned in the book, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but something like the success of a club off the pitch is mirrored by the success on. I think it's something like that. I've butchered your wording in your book. I do apologise. But we had an opportunity, certainly 16-17 season. We were that close to winning the league. Go and take the next step and then go win the league next season. We sat still, and then we are where we are now. But for me, the turning point was the ESL.
Yeah,
you can upset all Spurs fans, and that's fine, But when you're trying to essentially, or not trying, but doing something which is a really, really good chance of putting a lot of clubs out of business, and therefore a lot of fans suddenly have to pick another team, I think that's pretty unacceptable.
Yeah, I mean, the ESL, I don't think there's any defence of it, to be honest. I know that I think the club's defence was that this was happening anyway, and you either get left behind or you go along with it. But I don't think it's. I think looking back now, they accept that it was kind of inexcusable, and you do notice the damage that it's done to their standing among a lot of supporters.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree with your point in terms of what Daniel Levy has done for the club in terms of stabilising us. Before Sugar, who saved us, was it Irving Scholler? Have I got the name wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were pretty much bankrupt by that point when we and Sugar saved us, and then obviously Daniel Levy's now made us, well, billionaires essentially.
Mm.
So he has done well there. But yeah, it's just that 16-17 season and just sitting still, and then the ESL was, yeah.
I mean, I suppose the one thing you could say in Daniel Levy's defence, well, not the only thing, but one thing you can say in his defence is that if you think about football in the last 20 years, it's not been an easy time to navigate, and particularly for a club like Spurs. And again, like, you say there with, like, Sugar in the 90s, people have their opinions about him as well. By the end, he was a complete hate figure. So, on the one hand, he saved the club, but equally he turned them from, where they were to kind of, mid-table. There was no hope of ever getting any better. And so I suppose there's always going to be, you'll always have unpopular owners, I think, at most clubs. But yes, it's difficult for, I think, to assess where, maybe, I guess we won't know where the impact of Daniel Levy maybe until he's gone, I suppose. Not that he's imminently going anywhere. If you could look back and say, okay, 25 years we've had him, this is where we were, and this is where Spurs are now.
I think you can look at that now, can't you? Because when he came in, we were nowhere near European football. Now we're upset if we're not in the Champions League, which is a far cry from where we were. I mean, Christian Gross, absolutely dreadful he was, and then we're a million miles from there now. And Juan de Vamos as well. But yeah, what Cody's done talk about Levy is there's questions coming in now about Levy. So I guarantee we will get back to the book. But one from Craig Bowler. Did you find anything out about the three transfer windows where we didn't spend anything, being about reducing our outgoings to get a better refinancing deal, more profit equals less risk, better interest rate? I'm assuming that's on kind of the stadium. But did you find anything out about the reasons for no transfers in 3 windows?
I don't think it's public knowledge. I think there's an element of, from what you understand about the club, is that Spurs don't have perhaps the scouting network or the data networks that a lot of clubs have. So if you look at, like, when Leicester won the league and some of the signings they made, like Kanté for like $500,000 or something ridiculous, and Spurs don't seem to have that. So you had those windows. Spurs would have liked to sign players for good value, and they weren't finding any. So I think they were saying, like, we are, with the new stadium, even if it's not quite as cynical as that, they can't be going out and spending 70-80 million pound on a centre back, that Liverpool were able to do, or 50 million on a goalkeeper. So I think I don't know if it is kind of as clear cut as that behind the scenes, if that's what they were thinking. But I think the stadium obviously is always in the back of their mind, and they're thinking that we are going to be paying this off for so long. And then obviously COVID's made it worse because we've not got the income that we envisaged for the first two sort of couple of years, which no one could have seen that coming.
No. Yeah. One more comment before we get back to the book, I promise. From Cody, Alan Sugar very much acted in self-interest when he bought Tottenham. Yes, he saved the club along with Terry Venables. He also wanted a seat at the table when TV rights were being negotiated, which he's got his 75th series of The Apprentice coming on soon. It's probably not far the mark. But yeah, you talk about the new stadium in the book, obviously. How important is the new stadium? Because I was surprised reading that back in the early days, I mean, we're obviously humble beginnings now. You mentioned that we struggled to find a place to play, and now we're in the best stadium in the world. But I was surprised to read that we had concerts for kind of, not fundraising, but to help.
Money spinners.
Yeah, and then this new stadium is obviously a bowl. We've got Guns N' Roses, Lady Gaga, you've got Anthony Joshua, there was some rugby, there's NFL. So even though that was criticised with the new stadium, we're a football club, not a gig venue, not a this, not a that. In terms of the old days when we started, it's fairly similar, having like these extracurricular, if you like, non-football things to bring in money. So it's not too far off. And because Levy gets, you've taken the soul out of the club, you're not living to the ethos, but you could argue that he is by creating somewhere that has venues, has gigs and extra events like that to bring in more money. So what do you think about that? What do you think about that? Being that it's almost like full circle in a way.
Yeah, it's something they've always done, and I think one of the things I found out in the sort of the early days of the book is it kind of took on a life of its own. So in the beginning, these were, they'd have like a quiz night in the pub, or a little concert in the pub, and really minor events that would raise like tiny amounts of money. And then it gets on to sort of concerts, and they would have, early days of White Hart Lane, they'd have a big sort of sports fair, and like all the Spurs fans would go. Or even after the 1901 Cup final, they put on like obviously not a TV, but they managed to sort of put on these slides, so Spurs fans went to White Hart Lane and could look at sort of see the goals, because the people who hadn't been at the cup final. So they've always done these money spinners. So yeah, I do understand why people don't like them and think this is a Spurs stadium, but and it's not even just the early days. They used to have, Eubank fought there. They've had loads of fights there over the years. There was one in the 40s as well. It's quite a few famous fights they've had there. So none of it's new. I suppose the difficulty is it kind of fits into people who aren't happy with ENIC. That kind of completely fits into the image of them, not kind of focusing on football, but thinking about Lady Gaga and AJ and on all this kind of stuff. But on the flip side of that, one of the guys I interviewed, one of the people he's a guy called Paul Fletcher, who's designed quite a few stadiums. Yeah, Frank Bruno, that was the one. There was one of those.
Cheers, Craig.
So yeah, and he was making the point. He's designed the Ricoh, the new Huddersfield Stadium. He used to kind of be the head guy at Wembley, and he was saying this Spurs stadium just would not be viable if you have a football team plays there once a fortnight. You are never going to be able to fund this without the deal with the NFL. And if anything, he was like, they need to do more. They could have sort of along the outside little businesses, or even things like a barber's or something that kind of takes people to the stadium. Because still,
we're talking about a bar, but not built in, but on the side of which has obviously got a Dele Alli will be a frequent visitor there. I would have thought he'll probably live there.
Until next month, then.
But yeah, so it just makes sense, really, in a way, that if you're bringing in all of this extra money, which if that goes into the club, which is that's people's query, isn't it? That's people's gripe a lot of the time, that they'll get all this money. Does it go into the club or does it go in Levy's pocket? If it goes in Levy's pocket, unacceptable. If it goes into the club, it's fine. Have more gigs, have more fights, have more of this, have more of that. But yeah, and obviously COVID, because I think 11 of them got cancelled or postponed. So that's obviously not helped. But yeah, what do you see with that, with in terms of the money that comes in from those events? Because I'm sure, presumably those haven't happened yet because they got cut out, so you can't really write about that in your book because they haven't really happened.
Yeah.
But how do you see those going? And it will carry on. It will carry on with the unofficial British home of the NFL. So there'll obviously be more games there, and that must bring in a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think the plan is that there's always this talk of like a London NFL team, isn't there? So I think that's kind of understood that would be at Tottenham. So you'd have quite a lot of NFL if that does happen. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to stop doing them because they're unpopular. And the other thing, I suppose, I've known quite a few people who have gone to these events, like a few people that were at the AJ fight, and they all, not Spurs fans, and they all just said, wow, what a stadium. So I guess there's that side of it, what it does for the image of the club, as well as, financially. It's difficult to know where it goes. Obviously, it doesn't go into Daniel Levy's pocket, because he has his fixed salary, and whatever it says about ENIC and where the money goes for ENIC. I don't know the ins and outs, but it wouldn't make sense to purely have the stadium for football once a fortnight. I know that's the way it used to be, but it wouldn't make sense when you do have the option of doing that, I suppose.
Yeah. And then, like I say, like he had concerts, quizzes, and all of that stuff when we first started. It's not far off kind of what we did previously. It's just like you said, it's stuff way in the past that people aren't aware of.
Yeah, I suppose there's an element of that. I think there's always talk as well of the stadium is designed so cleverly that you can completely, it 1 minute it looks like a Spurs stadium and the next it looks like an NFL stadium. So I think people maybe don't like, at White Hart Lane you had the THFC painted like on the shelf and things like that, and there's none of that. So it means that you can just kind of flick a button and there's NFL advertising and there's no sign of Spurs at all. And obviously on the one hand that's quite clever, but then on the other hand, if you're a Spurs fan and you view this as your home, I understand why people are not in favour of.
Yeah, that's what happened with the NFL game. The whole Spurs shop was stripped of any Spurs stuff. It was just NFL stuff, which I'm not sure I agree in that. Yeah, Cody's got another question for you. If you could time travel, which decade of Spurs history would you choose to relive?
Good question. None. No. I guess it's got to be the 60s, hasn't it? I suppose maybe the sort of early 70s as well. And there's a bit in the book about that kind of later Bill Nick days, which not as well discussed. No. But yeah, it'd have to be sort of early 60s and going for the double, and then 62, 67 the cups, and obviously European Cup Winners' Cup as well. So they would have been the days, I imagine. But maybe the 2020s. Who knows? That could be the. I doubt it, but you never know.
Nah, I'd go back to the Champions League final and implore him not to start Kane, and implore Sissoko to put his arm down. But yeah, disco and hard drugs. Nice one, Kat. Says Cody. But yeah, I mean, Bill Nicholson in the 60s. I mean, that's obviously our heyday, isn't it? So formed in 1882, so what's that, 80 years? I mean, is that a long time in terms of starting a football club to being the best team in England and being the best team in Europe? So, I mean, how was it kind of writing about and researching that essentially rise to fame? I mean, I know it's a long time. It sounds ridiculous, 80 years, but in terms of starting a football team on a little stretch of grass over the road to being the best team in Europe, it seems like it could be quite a quick transition. Yeah, how was that to write about?
It is, and I suppose the thing is, in between, you've got 2 world wars, so that whole, the first sort of, you've got the 80s and it's like,
Cody would go back to the 80s. He also always wanted to die tooth decay. Well, apologies.
No, yeah. So I suppose in those early days, you've got so many. It's difficult to judge anything from that time because you've got 2 world wars and the impact of those. Then you've also got being booted out of the first division and Arsenal taking the place. So there's all these things that I suppose make it quite would have made it difficult because they've got the war leagues in all those years where they're not even playing sort of a serious league. So I think in the scheme of things it's not too long. And of course as well you've got 1951 as well and Arthur Rose. So they did have a sort of a short period as well. Obviously, it wasn't quite the same as under Bill Nicholson, where they were kind of unquestionably the best team for a lot longer. But you've still got that that title, and when they go up and then they win it in their first season up.
Yeah. It's just my dad was alive then, so he talks. He was born in '54, so he kind of remembers that stuff. But yeah, he might have been a little too young for that. But I was surprised as well that the amount of kits that we've had. So the first one was dark blue, which you associate now our away kit, and then it was the colour that we're not going to talk about. We're not going to mention that colour. But yeah, I mean, when did it change to the white kit that we associate with Tottenham now?
So it is one of the quite early AGMs. So, like you say, throughout the sort of 1880s and a bit of the 1890s, it's the thing is, I suppose then it's not a big deal what to anyone what colour they play in. But yeah, it partly comes from Preston North End, who obviously was such a prominent team at the time, and Spurs, the youngsters of the early Spurs really modelled themselves on them, and they actually went to see them in a cup final. And I thought, oh wow, this is like the team that we want to be like. So that's where the kind of the all white kits come from. And so on famous like European nights has always been white shorts as well as white top. So it's all dates back to then. But I think it was kind of one of the early AGMs where they had to sort of make more formal decisions, because before it was one minute they had that sort of chocolate kit, the one that they did 15 years ago, and then they had the half blue, half white to be like Blackburn, and it was Blackburn in fact that they saw in the cup final. Tell a lie, not Preston, but so they're kind of looking up to these other clubs, and they didn't have their own identity, so to speak. And then it was only then that they needed to sort of make more formal decisions, like what kits they're going to play in, and even things like the logo and all those bits.
Yeah. I mean, it was just surprising to me, and certainly that they struggled to find games to play. There was a local derby. I can't remember who the name was now. It wasn't Arsenal, but and then it became too popular, and then they decided no, leave. Yeah, it's quite interesting reading, and it's all stuff that you don't know about, and to research that must have been quite interesting.
Yeah, it was, because I mean, there's another thing. You sort of think of it as a bit of a linear thing. They'd found the club, they'd start playing games, then they join the league, but there was sort of all these hurdles, like for example, like you say, not having enough games to play, and particularly because they're so young as well. So there were local teams, but they're all adults, so they didn't want to play football with a load of teenage boys. So that was it's difficult. And then there's finding where to play and all this side of things as well. So it's difficult, and I think that's where the sort of community aspect comes in, because the early days, these kids on their own wouldn't have been able to form a football club of this level of organisation, and they started having meetings and all this sort of thing. So that's where the kind of local businesses, people like Oliver and people like that come in.
Yeah. I mean, if you're just joining us, we're talking about Kat's new book, Tottenham From the Lane, the story of Spurs in N17. If you want a copy for yourself, you can buy that here. pitchpublishing.co.uk/shop/Tottenham/-lane, not /lane. But and we've got a few more comments. Cody said you can stop taking my questions whenever you like. Keep them coming in, Cody. Keep them coming in. Brad, how you doing, Brad? My dad used to talk about the White Hart Lane Angels on match days during the early 60s. I don't know what they are. I'm assuming you looked into those.
It dates back to a European game, which was kind of quite heated, and it was an away game. And the media had said something like, Spurs were complaining about the number of fouls and all this, and it said, just like an off-the-cuff comment, like Spurs were no angels. So then the home leg at White Hart Lane, you've got these Spurs fans come in like these kind of mock togas and looking like angels. and then when Spurs win, they've got the and you have the open top bus. Then you've got these angels come back again, and they've got these big banners that say like, "Hallowed be their names." Kind of all these like sort of religious slogans, but kind of with a Spurs twist. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but kind of all about Spurs, but. And they look like kind of sort of semi Jesus figures. So I think, they were quite they were like a big thing for people in the 60s.
You don't get things like that now, do you? Everything has to be so clean cut, and you can't do anything these days. So I mean, that's a bit of character, isn't it? And kind of something different that you see.
It's also where the glory hallelujah comes from as well, because the sort of the hallelujah and the singing about and I think Bill Nick said after he heard the fans saying it, and said it was almost like a kind of religious feeling at White Hart Lane, all these people singing glory hallelujah. So again, it's one of those sort of Spurs things that's been lost in the midst of time almost, but it all dates back to the 60s.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that. It's just so much you don't know. And yeah, no wonder it took 2 years to write. Yeah, another question from Cody. If you had to choose between, this is another one that always is polarising. If you had to choose between finishing 4th and winning the League Cup and finishing 7th, which would you choose?
I mean, at the minute we're finishing 7th and not even winning the league cup. So I'd
That's
take
slightly unfair because we've got about 15 games in hand at the moment. So.
I think the one thing I would say is I always remember being at City away in 2010 when we got in the Champions League for the first time. And I know this sounds like a classic Spurs fan thing to say, but the final whistle was like winning a cup. Like the atmosphere was just, it was the best away atmosphere I've ever seen. So I want to say, I'd like to say if it meant coming 4th, and that means going forward we'll be back in that position for the next 5 years, I would say 4th. But if it was come 4th and then go back to where we are, then I would say I'll just take the day out at Wembley. We'd have to go to Wembley again as well. That's the thing if we won the League Cup, and I've had enough cold days out at Wembley. So,
I mean, do you talk about that in your book? Because Wembley for me was always the pinnacle. You get there when you're the best, and then going there every 2 weeks for how many seasons, it's completely lost its appeal now for me.
It does talk a little bit about that and how, again, it was sort of, it couldn't be helped, but we were there a lot longer than we intended to be, and it's lost its appeal for a lot of people. Obviously, I wouldn't complain if we did get to a cup final. We wouldn't think, let's boycott it, let's not go. But I mean, I suppose one thing is Wembley is one of the stadiums, along with Arsenal, that the new Spurs stadium has learnt things. They've looked at that and said that doesn't work at all. So Wembley, people talk about the lack of the atmosphere, even the fact, like, when they have the NFL there and they have, you could still see the NFL logo in the sort of centre circle. So, Spurs, obviously, we can't have that again. I think we had a game against City, it might have been, where they'd had NFL the week before at Wembley, and Spurs were playing, and there were NFL markings like all over the place. And I think that the league weren't too happy about it either, because they were saying you can't have this. This looks insane. But all these little things. I suppose Wembley, we've learned lessons, but it wasn't the best.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of that 4th and 7th, Cody said excellent.
Another one.
But Brad has said, thanks. Never knew the history behind the Angels and the origins of Glory, Glory, Hallelujah. But again, I encourage you to get this book. You'll find out so much that you didn't know, so much you knew about, but you didn't know the reasons, and so much that you'll completely learn. And I'm not sure if you want to answer this. I'm not sure if the publishers would be. Craig's asked, does it make any difference getting it on Amazon?
You can get it on Amazon. It's in, so you can get it on Waterstones, Amazon, and Smiths, I think. If you go on the website that we put up earlier, I think there's a big list of places you can get it. So
if you go on here, Craig, pitchpublishing.co.uk/shop/Tottenham-Lane, you'll have all the links to be able to.
There's a link to
from the various outlets. Excellent. And now you've written this book, 2 years it's taken. It must have been quite a nice distraction, certainly when we were playing bad. Any ambitions to write another one?
Definitely. One? I think after the last 2 years, I think maybe it's on hold a little bit. But there's definitely like a few ideas, and a couple of them's quite Spurs focused. So hopefully I'll be back in another couple of years.
Excellent. So obviously they won't be about the history unless there's so much history that you need a second volume to write about that. But what are the ideas, or are they stuff you want to keep to yourself at the time?
It depends, I think, because there's always, this is kind of a full history from 100 nearly 40 years, but there's always like little bits that you want to focus in on, and you think, that particular time was quite interesting, or it might be about Conte's all the cups that we've won, in the next, between now. So that's going to be like a big, massive. Yeah, I don't know. There's a few ideas, but yeah, we'll have to see.
What do you think of Conte? Obviously, Nuno, I still don't really understand why we got him. I still don't understand why he plays Kane and Son. He played Kane and Son and decided not to use them at all. The whole Jose, you bring Jose in to win a cup, he gets within a reach, and then you sack him 6 days later. And now we've got Conte, and a lot of people saying this is Levy's last chance. He gets this wrong, he's really going to be struggling to keep his role there and have 60,000 people shouting Levy out at the top of his voice every 2 weeks. But what do you think of Conte, and do you think he'll bring us success? Do you think it's a long-term appointment, or do you think it will not last long past the 18 months that he's been given?
I mean, that is the thing, isn't it, with Conte? That's kind of been his pattern. He wears me out. Even look at minutes, you're like, shit,
he must wear himself out, the amount that he runs about.
But then he's so quietly spoken as well. So then, when you speak to him, like, what? It's so funny. But I think he'll do. I think it's a fantastic appointment. I cannot believe, when he took it, I thought, wow, this is one of the best managers in the world at the moment. Whereas, the Jose thing, you've got the name, but at the point he came, he wasn't in that sort of form. It's difficult because there is only so much you can do, and I think there's a lot of work that needs doing with both the squad and also it's just where can you go, because the title or anything like that isn't massively attainable. I don't know if there's any manager that could come in and be able to compete with City and Liverpool and Chelsea this season. It's a difficult one, but an FA Cup and top 4, I think that would be. That you'd have to say that was massive success. So I think it's attainable. And even the last few weeks you've started to see it kind of picking up, but then obviously we've lost the momentum again, which is disappointing. In the last few weeks, obviously with all these games postponed.
Yeah. Craig's found the book on Amazon, being lazy, not looking on there. But yeah, I completely agree. My biggest, not concern, but like a question is what happens in January, because there has to have been some discussions when he was offered the job on transfers and ins and outs and everything like that. And Conte needs to spend money generally. He needs to, not necessarily the net is 100 million, because I'm not selling anyone, but he sells players, he buys players in, which traditionally Levy isn't a huge fan of. But I think that the difference is with Pochettino, Jose, and Nuno, when they asked for something, Levy said no. They went okay. Whereas Conte will just say bye bye and walk off. And I'm not sure Levy can afford that, being like you say, this world class manager. I'm not sure he can afford him to just walk off because of broken promises. So what do you see happening in January, or do you think there'll be a couple of bit of business and then summer will be quite a big?
Yeah, I mean, it typically goes that way, doesn't it? The winter window is always quiet. So I wouldn't have thought it would be massive. But again, it's difficult because you would expect that Antonio Conte has come in and with a list of demands. I don't know how specific they are, if it's that I want this X amount of money, or if it's more likely, a centre back, a centre mid, something done with the goalkeeper, either a new deal for the Reese, or start looking, long term at a new keeper. There's so many. The list goes on, but you'd imagine that he's got this list, but again, it's not easy. If there's no value in the market and he says we want a centre mid, and there's no one under 50 million that would actually come in and improve the team, then do they buy them for the sake of it because they say, well, we did say we'd give them the money, or do they kind of stick to how they've always dealt with things? So we'll see. It's a difficult one, but you would imagine that if you go for Antonio Conte, you would think that the board have accepted that they'll be spending some money, and that this won't be. They won't expect him to kind of work with the bare bones.
Yeah, I can't believe that we won't buy any players in January just because of Conte. And if we don't get some kind of creative midfielder, I'll be absolutely furious. I think we're crying out for that. Couple of comments from David Clark. How you doing, David? Levy will be there as long as he wants. He holds 29.4% shares and is chairman of ENIC, possibly. He's also gone on to say Conte can be given millions, but it's about, are we big enough to attract world-class players? When you have Conte, you can attract players.
Yeah,
Players will want to play for Conte. If you've got Nuno there, with all due respect to Nuno, you don't have the same pull with Nuno there as you do with the Conte there. But yeah, another player, this is possibly the most polarising question you'll be asked ever. Thoughts on Harry Kane this season? He's obviously gone from up there to down there, and now somewhere in between, and some people are still up there, some people are down there. What do you make of the whole transfer saga, his poor form and everything?
I mean, I'm still inclined to say, the thing of form's temporary, class is permanent. And I don't believe a player of Harry Kane's ability just disappears overnight, And I know sort of even in the Euros, there were times when he wasn't looking fit and it's built up over years because he's played a lot of games over the last few years without a lot of time off. Psychologically, obviously, what happened in the summer is going to have an effect. But, it's difficult for him because he's sort of, I don't know if he knows entirely what is expected of him, because he's not scoring goals, but equally, because we don't have that sort of Eriksen behind him, he's almost coming so deep that he's doing that himself. And if we had someone there doing that, you wouldn't, or, at his peak when you had Dele Alli behind him as well. Whereas when he doesn't have that, that's partly his job. And so often, he's out wide or he's kind of by the halfway line, and it makes it so difficult if that was all he had to do, if you had the players around him and you just said, put him in the box, I think we'd see it, whatever happened in the summer, we'd see a different Kane to what we're seeing now. Yeah,
I think the creative midfielder is essential for that reason. And I think with Nuno, if you've got strike, if Liverpool decided to play with no attacking intent at all, Mo Salah would struggle.
Yeah,
and it's the same. And then obviously the transfer window and everything that happened there. I think he made an error in the refusing to train by thinking that he can do whatever he wants and the fans will still back him over Levy, but he's forgotten about the fact that the badge is bigger than him. But yeah, I still think under Conte he'll come good. He's too good a player not to. But yeah, a quick question from Mark. We talked about what's the name of the pub that we call Beehive?
Yeah.
Is Bell and Hare still there?
No, it's not.
No.
The building is there, but it's called Number 8. So it's kind of.
I know where that is.
Yeah. So there's another one up by Manor House. I think there's a few of them. I don't know if it's kind of, there's a lot of them. But yeah, no, the Bell and Hare's gone. So sad.
Will they be kind of bringing that back somewhere else as part of the kind of infrastructure?
I wouldn't have thought
so. Yeah.
Because it's the same thing, it's still a pub, it's just kind of different owners. So the Bell and Hare was there for years though, so I don't know why they sold it or what happened there. But yeah, it disappeared overnight basically, and now it's the Number 8 is a nice pub actually, but it's I think like the Bell and Hare is like one of the classic Tottenham pubs for match day fans.
Yeah, go to the Beehive, Mark, instead. Although I did notice you mentioned in the book about the banner that was over there with Levy's face saying, I've got more ales than I've had managers. They've taken that down now.
Yeah, I'm
not sure if that was Levy paid them a visit or...
Yeah, maybe Daniel Levy's read the book and said, what's...
Yeah. Or he's had too many managers and they can't afford as many ales, so it's not factually accurate anymore.
Nuno was the one that sort of tipped them over.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of this season, last couple of questions. In terms of this season, we've obviously got 2 games in hand. I think that'll probably be our lot because I think we'll probably play against Leicester. Obviously not ideal. They haven't trained. We're going to be unfit. It's away against a team who've just won 4-0. And then we've got a very easy game against Liverpool. But if you can win those games in hand, win those two, or certainly not lose those games, we're right back in that top four race. We've got Conte now. We're in a quarter-final of a cup. I'm eternally optimistic. I don't know why I do it to myself. I'm optimistic, and then when we lose, it's even more bigger kick in the teeth. But what do you see happening this season? What do you think we can achieve this season?
I do. Again, I would lean towards being quite optimistic. I mean, I don't know, but the top four is not kind of out of possibility. You know, I mean, West Ham.
I think top three are done. It's just what order that will be, and then fourth is up for grabs.
That is unattainable. But yeah, I suppose fourth. You know, West Ham, Arsenal, United. You know, there's so many teams. I think United will be in it, but you know, now with the new manager and the squad that they have. But I mean, given the way the season started, I would say fifth would be acceptable. You know, years ago it would have been disappointing, but now, when you think of where we were, I think you know, if you give Conte 6 months, come fifth, and maybe, you know, a cup run as well, you know, that'd be a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely improved us. So before all of this COVID kind of shut us down, undefeated in 4, 3 wins. I think only one game we conceded a goal in that. I think that was Leeds. Yeah, definite improvement. Hopefully it just doesn't derail us too much. But yeah, in terms of the book, Craig's ordered it now. Hopefully it turns up, although it looks like that's my Christmas reading, so presumably he's not going to be reading it for about 2 weeks. But yeah, highly encourage you to get the book as well. It's Kat's new book, Tottenham From the Lane, story of Spurs in N17, which you can buy. Let me get the website up at pitchpublishing.co.uk/shop/Tottenham-Lane. Just before we go, again, for anyone who missed it earlier or doesn't know about it, how would you describe the book? Obviously, it's a history of Tottenham, but yeah, how would you describe the book to people who want to know a bit more about it before buying it or don't know anything about it?
Yeah, so like you say, it's a history of Tottenham, but with more of a kind of a local community feel. So it starts in 1882, goes all the way up until the Nuno times, which I was pleased about because I thought, oh yeah, this is so up to date. And then by the time it came out, oh no. But I think that's always going to happen.
You were delighted about writing about absolute dross on a football pitch as well.
Well, I think actually it might have been. I think it went off just as he'd been appointed. So he said, "Oh, you know, exciting new era under Nuno." And you know, obviously, that's the hazard of a book. You know, it's kind of immortalised now that I was so optimistic. But yeah, so it's essentially just a history of Tottenham Hotspur, but hopefully given a bit more detail about their local history and, you know, their place in Tottenham. You know, so not just the club, but, you know, Tottenham as a whole. So even if you're not from Tottenham or, you know, you're not from London or the Southeast, I think it you know, it kind of helps you connect to the club, particularly when we're not even playing at the moment. But, you know, if you're, you know, I suppose there's people have had that kind of disconnect, and hopefully it sort of can help you sort of engage with them a little bit over the years.
Definitely. Yeah, excellent. Make sure you get it. You know, even if you're not a Tottenham fan, there's so many Tottenham fans around, so you must know someone who is a Tottenham fan. Go order it. Again, for anyone who's forgotten or doesn't know, you can get it from here, pitchpublishing.co.uk/shop/Tottenham-Lane, and go and buy this. Tottenham From the Lane, the story of Spurs in N17. We've pretty much reached the end now. It's been great talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on. And yeah, when you write your sequel, come on again, or if you just want to rant about Tottenham or predict what's going to happen in the next game, yeah, just hit me up on Twitter. But it's been great having you on. Thanks so much for coming on and talking about your book, and congratulations with the book. And
thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. And
no problem. My pleasure.
Hopefully the Leicester game goes ahead and it goes well.
Yeah, well, I'll be back on Friday. Obviously, if Leicester goes ahead, then it'll be a Leicester review. There won't be a Leicester preview. But yeah, and just before we go as well, Bob Spur, lovely Bob. Hope you get better soon. Praying for you, and yeah, everyone do the same. Lovely bloke, Bob, and you know, a bit of a bad way at the moment. But yeah, once again, thanks so much, Kat. Good luck with the book.
Thanks.
And as always, before we go, come on, you Spurs.
Thank you so much for watching, for everybody who participated in the live chat and added comments. Before you go, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Anybody who couldn't watch the live video, you can still catch us on YouTube. Add any comments, suggestions or questions to the comments section on the video. Anybody who's listened to the audio-only podcast, thank you so much for listening. Anybody who wants the audio-only podcast, you get this wherever you get your podcast from. Alternatively, if you go to Twitter, @Talk Tottenham, you'll find all the information there. We'll be back soon. We're live Mondays, 8 p.m, Fridays, 12:30 UK time. Until then, come on, you Spurs!